It was a quiet Sunday morning when the postman's knock echoed through the small house. The same house where every wall still carried my late husband's laughter, and every photograph told stories of a family that once felt whole. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. A single white envelope lay in the postman's hand, thick, gold-edged, elegant. My heart fluttered before my mind even caught up. The handwriting on the front? It was my son Ethan's. I smiled, whispering to myself, "Finally." The wedding invitation. For weeks, I had waited to see it. Not just the invitation, but the symbol of my son's new beginning. The woman he loved, Tiffany, was beautiful, ambitious, and from a well-known family. I had my worries, yes, but all I ever wanted was his happiness. I sat by the kitchen window, sunlight falling softly over the letter, and gently tore the envelope open. The scent of expensive paper filled the air, that faint perfume of pride and preparation. But as my eyes drifted over the printed words, my smile froze. The family of the groom, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Collins. Edward Collins, my late husband, but my name wasn't there. At first, I thought I had missed it. I read again, slowly, every line, every name. My hands began to tremble. Then I looked at the bottom, where the guest names were listed. And there it was. Mrs. Martha Collins, guest, a guest. In my own son's wedding, the air in the room grew heavy. My throat tightened. I kept blinking, as if my tears were just dust to be wiped away. I whispered his name under my breath. Ethan. How could you? Memories flooded me. Late nights when I'd stayed up sewing his school uniforms. The days I'd skipped meals so he could eat better. The years I had worked double shifts after Edward's death just to keep this house standing. And now, I was a guest in the family I built with my bare hands. I sank into the chair, clutching the invitation to my chest, trying to breathe past the ache spreading through me. Maybe it was a mistake, I thought. Maybe the printer got it wrong. Ethan would never do this intentionally, would he? But the silence of that morning said otherwise. The ticking clock seemed louder than ever. Each second echoed my humiliation, my disbelief, and the slow birth of a pain I didn't yet have words for. After a long moment, I stood up, wiped my tears, and looked at my reflection in the glass window. I looked small, invisible. But beneath that reflection, something stirred, a flicker of resolve. I whispered to myself, "No. I'll ask him. I'll look him in the eyes and hear the truth." As I folded the invitation back into its envelope, my hand steadied. I didn't know it then, but that small act, deciding to confront my own son, would unravel secrets I never imagined my family could hide. I didn't sleep that night. The invitation lay on the table, the golden edges glinting in the dim lamplight like it was mocking me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words again. Mrs. Martha Collins, guest. By morning, my head ached from thinking, but one thought kept circling. Talk to Ethan. There had to be a reason. My boy wouldn't erase me from his own wedding, would he? I dialed his number, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. After a few rings, his voice came through, tired, distracted, colder than I remembered. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Ethan, I got the wedding invitation. There's something wrong with it." A pause, long enough to feel like a wall between us. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice flat. "My name," I said softly. "It's listed under the guests, not the family." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Oh, that? Must have been a printing mistake. Don't worry about it. That's all?" I whispered. "A mistake? Mom, Tiffany handled most of that stuff. It's not a big deal. The important thing is you're invited, right?" I felt the words slice through the line and into me. Invited. Like I should be grateful for being allowed in. Before I could respond, I heard Tiffany's voice in the background. Light, cheerful, the kind that sounds sweet until you really listen. Tell her we'll fix it later, she said. We're busy right now. The line went silent again. Ethan sighed. Mom, I gotta go. We'll talk another time. And then the call ended. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the emptiness on the other end. My son, my only son, sounded like a stranger reading a script. Hours passed. I couldn't sit still. My heart kept whispering that something wasn't right, that maybe Tiffany's voice behind the phone wasn't just coincidence. By evening, I decided to go see him. I baked his favorite pie, apple with cinnamon, the one he used to beg for after school, and drove across town. When I reached their house, I barely recognized it. The yard was manicured, the porch covered in expensive decor. Everything screamed perfection. Tiffany opened the door before I could even knock twice. Her smile was thin, polished, practiced. Oh, Martha, she said brightly. What a surprise. I just wanted to drop this off, I said, holding out the pie. And maybe talk to Ethan? Her eyes flickered, then softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was pity. He's resting, she said. You know how stressful wedding planning is. Maybe you should just attend quietly, like a guest. It'll be easier for everyone, I froze. Those words, attend quietly like a guest, hit harder than I could bear. She patted my arm as if comforting me, but the gesture felt like dismissal. I'll make sure he calls you, she added, closing the door before I could respond. I stood there on the porch, holding the pie, pretending I didn't hear the laughter drifting from inside, the laughter of my son and his new family, a world I no longer belonged to. That night, back home, I sat before my husband's framed photo. Edward, I whispered, our boy has changed. Tears blurred my vision as I touched the edge of the invitation once more. And then, I heard it, from the phone on the table, Ethan's voice, faint but clear. I must have accidentally answered a call before it rang. Yes, Tiffany, he was saying. I know you told the printer to leave her name out. Just don't let her find out. My breath caught. My fingers went cold. So it wasn't a mistake after all. It was a choice. And in that moment, I realized silence could wound far deeper than words ever could. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the pie still untouched. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and regret. All night, Ethan's voice replayed in my head, his quiet confession to Tiffany, the cold truth that it wasn't a mistake. My son had known. He had agreed. I stared at the invitation again, but this time I didn't cry. Something inside me had gone still. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from sadness. It comes from clarity. And I needed answers. I picked up my shawl, grabbed my purse, and stepped out. The air was crisp, the morning sun sharp on my face as I walked toward the small printing shop downtown, the one that had handled the wedding invitations. Inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. A young man behind the counter looked up, nervous when he saw me holding one of those invitations. Good morning, I said gently. You printed these, right? He nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. The order came from Mrs. Tiffany Moore. I hesitated before speaking. Did she give you this list herself? He looked around as if afraid someone might hear. She did. She brought it in personally, very specific about the names. My heart thudded once hard. Did she say anything about my name? He swallowed. She asked that it not appear in the family section. She said you were, well, just a guess now. I felt my stomach twist. Still, I kept my voice calm. And my son, Ethan? She was alone, he said softly. But she mentioned he approved everything. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thanked him quietly and stepped outside. The world blurred, cars passing, children laughing somewhere in the distance, a dog barking. But to me, it all sounded far away. My son hadn't been tricked. He had chosen silence. He had chosen her version of the truth. As I walked down the street, I noticed a group of well-dressed women chatting outside a cafe. Their laughter was sharp, rehearsed, like everything in Tiffany's world. And then I heard one of them say it, her voice light, cruel, almost proud. Oh yes, Tiffany's mother told us. The groom's mother isn't part of the picture anymore. She's just attending. The words hung in the air like poison. I froze mid-step. My chest ached as I turned toward the cafe window. Inside, sitting with those women, was Tiffany's mother, wearing a pearl necklace, smiling like a queen, her voice sweet as sugar and just as hollow. She leaned forward and said, "You know, image matters. The wedding must look refined, elegant. Some people just don't fit that image, and we can't let them ruin it." Her friends laughed, and I realized she wasn't talking about some people. She was talking about me. I stood there for a long moment, gripping my purse so tightly my fingers hurt. They had erased me, not just from paper, but from dignity, from belonging. From my own family, I walked away quietly, head held high. My eyes burned, but I refused to let a single tear fall on that street. I had cried enough for them already. That night, as I sat in my quiet house, the ticking clock echoed again, steady, cold, relentless. But somewhere inside that rhythm, something changed. The pain didn't fade. It hardened. I looked at the invitation once more and whispered to myself, if they want a refined wedding without me, then they'll see what grace really looks like. And in that moment, I wasn't just a mother left out. I was a woman about to reclaim her truth. 3 days had passed since I learned the truth. 3 days since I stood outside that cafe, hearing my name tossed aside like it meant nothing. I hadn't spoken to Ethan since. I told myself I needed time. Time to calm the ache in my chest, to breathe before I faced him again. Then, one evening, a message arrived on my phone. It was from Ethan. Family dinner at Tiffany's parents' house tonight. Document be there. No warmth. No apology. Just an instruction, as if I were being summoned, not invited. Still, I went. Because a mother's heart never gives up on her child, no matter how deep the wound. When I arrived, their home shimmered with perfection. Chandeliers glowing through glass windows, soft jazz floating in the air. The front door opened before I could knock. Tiffany stood there, radiant in a silk dress, her smile sweet but sharp enough to cut glass. "Martha, you made it," she said, her tone drenched in politeness. "Come in, everyone's been waiting." I stepped inside. The dining room sparkled with silver cutlery, white roses, and a table long enough to seat 20. I recognized no one, only Tiffany's parents, her cousins, and a few wealthy friends. Ethan was at the far end, smiling nervously, a man caught between two worlds. "Everyone," Tiffany began, raising her glass. "This is Ethan's mother, Martha Collins." The room fell quiet. A few polite nods, one forced smile. Then the conversations resumed, flowing right around me like I wasn't even there. I sat beside Ethan, but he barely looked up from his plate. Every time I tried to speak, Tiffany's mother interrupted, steering the talk toward their family's properties, their businesses, their status. At one point, she leaned forward and said, "Ethan has really elevated since joining our family, hasn't he? We're so proud of how refined he's become." Everyone laughed softly, their eyes flicking toward me, as if refinement was something I could never touch. I smiled. Even as my heart splintered, dinner continued, each bite tasting like silence and shame. The laughter grew louder, the conversations more arrogant, and my presence smaller. Then Tiffany raised her glass again, clinking it gently for attention. "I just want to say," she said sweetly, "tonight we celebrate not only love, but the two women who shaped Ethan into the man he is today." I looked up, surprised. Maybe this was it, a moment of kindness. She turned toward her mother, her smile glowing. "To my mom, who taught me grace, strength, and how to build a beautiful life." The guests applauded. Cameras flashed. Her mother smiled proudly. And then Tiffany's gaze flickered to me for a split second. Cold, dismissive, before she turned away again. She never said my name. The applause faded, but the silence that followed roared in my ears. I looked at Ethan, hoping, praying, he'd say something. Anything. But he stayed still, his eyes on his wine glass, his mouth tight. I nodded to myself, the last piece of hope inside me quietly breaking. I pushed my chair back slowly, careful not to make noise. "Excuse me," I said softly. "It's getting late." No one stopped me, no one even noticed. I walked out of that glittering house into the cool night air. The sky was vast and empty above me, and I felt small, smaller than I'd ever felt before. But beneath the pain, there was something else now. A whisper, steady and low, telling me I wouldn't be small forever. Just as I reached the gate, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Mr. Jacobs, an old family friend who had been at the dinner. His eyes were gentle but troubled. He slipped an envelope into my hand and whispered, "Your husband wanted your son to have this, but I think you should see it first." Before I could ask, he walked away, disappearing into the glow of the house. I stood there under the streetlight, holding that envelope against my chest, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. My late husband's handwriting scrawled across it. Inside that paper lay the truth that would change everything. I didn't open the envelope right away. It sat on my kitchen table all night, staring at me, whispering secrets from the past I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The next morning, as dawn light spilled across the floor, I made myself a cup of coffee. Though I barely tasted it, my hands trembled as I finally broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter, aged, yellowing at the edges. My late husband's handwriting danced across it, strong and familiar. To my son, Ethan. When the time comes, this letter will tell you the truth your mother and I both wanted you to know. My breath caught. He wrote this for Ethan, not for me. But Mr. Jacobs had said, "You should see it first," so I read on. "Ethan, my greatest pride has been you. But before you build your future, you must know what was hidden from you. Our home, our company, everything we owned. It exists today because of your mother's sacrifice. When my business fell apart, it was your mother's inheritance that rebuilt it. She never let me tell you because she wanted you to respect me. She chose love over pride." Tears blurred the ink as I kept reading. "If anything ever divides you and your mother, remember, she gave up her family's fortune for ours. You owe her everything you stand on. If you forget this truth, you'll lose more than wealth. You'll lose your soul." By the time I reached the end, my heart was shaking. My husband, the man they all dismissed as a failed businessman, had left behind proof of who I truly was in this family. And Ethan? He had no idea. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling a mixture of grief and something fierce, something rising inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was power, awakening after years of silence. Later that afternoon, I went to see Mr. Jacobs. He looked both relieved and sad when he opened his door. "I thought you deserved to know before they destroy it," he said quietly. "Tiffany's family, they found out about the letter. They've been keeping Ethan from it. Said it would cause unnecessary drama." I could hardly breathe. They knew. They knew. And still, they let me sit there at that dinner table, humiliated, while my husband's truth lay buried. Mr. Jacobs continued, "Your husband gave that letter to me before he died. He said, if Martha ever becomes the villain in Ethan's eyes, give her this chance to defend herself." Those words struck deep. Villain. That's what I'd become, in my own son's story. But now, I had the truth. That night, I sat at my vanity, looking at my reflection. My eyes were tired, but there was a steadiness in them I hadn't seen in years. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse. Tomorrow, I would go to Ethan, not to beg, not to explain, but to show. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be seen. I whispered softly to the mirror. "You took everything from me, Tiffany. My family, my place, my dignity. But you forgot. Truth always finds its way home." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the window panes. Rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, like the heavens themselves had chosen to witness what was coming next. And as lightning flashed, I could almost feel my husband's presence beside me. Silent, steady, proud. Tomorrow I would walk into that house, not as the unwanted mother, but as the woman whose truth would tear their perfect world apart. The morning of the wedding arrived like a scene painted in gold. Sunlight spilling over the manicured lawns, white chairs lined in rows, laughter echoing from every corner. But beneath that beauty, there was a storm coming. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the folds of my navy blue dress. Not a trace of bitterness showed on my face, only calm. I pinned on my pearl brooch, the one my husband gave me on our 10th anniversary, and whispered, "For you." When I arrived at the venue, heads turned. Guests whispered. I could feel their eyes tracing every step I took. The mother who wasn't supposed to be here. The woman erased from her own family's story. Tiffany's expression faltered the moment she saw me. Her painted smile trembled, just for a second before she turned away, clutching Ethan's arm. Ethan. My son looked handsome, nervous, distracted. But when his eyes met mine, there was no warmth. Just unease, I smiled softly anyway. Congratulations, Ethan. He nodded, barely audible. Mom, this isn't a good time. I know, I said gently. That's why I chose it. The ceremony began, elegant, extravagant, hollow. Tiffany glided down the aisle like she owned the world. Her parents beamed, proud and powerful. And I sat in the second row, quietly watching, holding my husband's letter close in my purse. As the vows were exchanged, I saw Ethan's hands tremble. For a fleeting second, I wondered if he felt it, the weight of truth pressing at the edges of this perfect lie. Then, just as the officiant declared them husband and wife, a familiar voice echoed from the back. Before we proceed to the signing of documents, Mr. Jacobs said, stepping forward, I've been asked to read a statement left by the late Mr. Walker to be read on his son's wedding day. The music stopped. Whispers rippled through the guests. Tiffany's father frowned. This isn't on the program. But Mr. Jacobs only raised the sealed envelope. Your husband's last wish, Mrs. Walker, he said, looking at me. It's time. My pulse raced as he began to read. To my son, Ethan, if you are hearing this, you are beginning a new life. I hope you have found love that values truth over appearances. Before you take this step, you must know the foundation you stand upon. Every brick, every beam of your success was built by your mother's sacrifice. A murmur swept through the room. Tiffany's smile froze. When I failed in business, it was your mother who saved us. She sold her inheritance to protect your future. Never forget, it was she who carried our family when I could not. Everything in my name, the house, the assets, the land, legally belongs to your mother. That was my final act of gratitude to her. Gasps filled the air. Tiffany's mother rose abruptly. That's ridiculous. That property is under our... Mr. Jacobs interrupted calmly. All legal documents confirm it. Mr. Walker never transferred ownership. Mrs. Walker remains the rightful owner. Ethan's face drained of color. He turned to Tiffany. Did you know about this? Her lips quivered, eyes darting. It's a mistake, Ethan. I was told... But the guests were already whispering, their perfect facade unraveling like cheap silk. I stood slowly, my voice steady and clear. You erased me from your family list, Tiffany. But you forgot. Truth doesn't need an invitation. Silence fell. Even the air seemed to pause. I looked at Ethan, my son, my boy who once held my hand at every school play, and for a moment, I saw the frightened child again. Mom, he whispered, tears rising. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said softly. But you chose not to ask. Tiffany's parents tried to speak, but the officiant, awkward and pale, simply stepped aside. And I turned to leave. Not in anger, but with grace. The kind that comes from surviving every humiliation and still standing tall. As I reached the exit, I heard the guests murmuring. Was that really his mother? She owned everything? She carried herself like royalty. and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Outside, the sun had dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I took a deep breath and whispered, "It's done." Behind me, the music stopped. Tiffany was crying. Ethan stood frozen. And the truth, the one buried beneath pride and lies, had finally spoken for itself. The air inside that grand hall hung heavy after the truth unfolded. The music had stopped, laughter had vanished, and all that remained was silence. The kind that exposes everything people tried to hide behind smiles and silk. Tiffany was sobbing by the altar, her mascara bleeding down her perfect face. Her parents whispered frantically, trying to contain the chaos, but the whispers of the guests were louder, like a tide rising with judgment. And Ethan. My son stood in the middle of it all, frozen. His shoulders slumped, eyes distant, as if the foundation of his world had crumbled right beneath him. He turned toward me slowly, his lips trembling. "Mom, please, don't go." For the first time, his voice wasn't proud or defensive. It was the voice of a child lost in a storm of his own making. I stopped at the doorway, the soft fabric of my dress brushing against the marble floor. I didn't turn around right away. I wanted him to feel the silence he'd left me in for so many years. When I finally looked back, I saw him walking toward me, stumbling almost, eyes wet, heartbroken. He knelt before me in front of everyone. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't know how cruel I'd become. I let her change how I saw you. I forgot everything you did for me." Tiffany's father tried to intervene, muttering, "Ethan, not here." But Ethan cut him off sharply. "No, all my life I tried to impress people like you. And in the process, I betrayed the one person who ever truly loved me." His words echoed through the hall, trembling but honest. The crowd fell silent again. Even Tiffany stopped crying, too stunned to speak. I reached out and gently touched his face. "Ethan," I said softly, "I forgave you long before you asked." He looked up, confused. "You, what?" I smiled faintly. "Because forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me. I refuse to let bitterness become the last thing your father's home remembers." He broke down completely then, his head resting against my hand like when he was a boy. But even in that moment, I knew something had changed. The bond between us, though fragile, had finally faced the truth. I helped him to his feet. "You'll learn now," I said gently, "that respect isn't demanded by wealth or title. It's earned by how you treat the ones who stood beside you when no one else did." Tiffany tried to approach, voice trembling. "Mrs. Walker, I didn't mean to—" I stopped her with a calm smile. "Don't explain. Life will teach you better lessons than I ever could." Then I turned to the guests, still watching with wide eyes. "Thank you for celebrating love today," I said softly. "Because love, real love, is what survives truth, not what hides from it." And with that, I left. Outside, the sky had turned a soft amber, the evening sun wrapping me in gold. I walked down the long path away from the mansion, heels clicking softly on the stones, heart steady for the first time in years. Behind me, I could still hear Ethan calling my name, not with guilt, but with a kind of broken reverence. That was enough. I didn't need revenge. I had peace. And sometimes, that's the most powerful revenge of all. Weeks passed since that wedding, weeks of quiet mornings and softer skies. The house that once echoed with memories of laughter and loss now stood empty. But it didn't feel lonely anymore. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. And the sound was peaceful. I sold the mansion soon after, not out of anger, but closure. It had witnessed too much heartbreak. I packed only what mattered: my husband's photo, his letter, a few old books, and that pearl brooch he'd given me long ago. Everything else I left behind. I moved to a small coastal town 2 hours away. The sea breeze carried salt and calm into every breath. I rented a little cottage near the cliffs. White curtains, blue shutters, and a garden that caught the morning sun. Each day, I would sit by the shore, watching the waves crash and retreat, over and over. They reminded me of life, of how even the fiercest storms pull back eventually, leaving behind a smoother shore. With time, I began something new. I opened a small community center for widowed women, a place for those who had lost their voices in the noise of the world. We shared tea, laughter, pain, and courage. I called it Grace Haven. It wasn't grand, but it was real, and it healed me as much as it helped them. One evening, as the sky burned orange over the water, a familiar car pulled up near the gate. Ethan stepped out, older, humbler, carrying no pride this time. He hesitated at the door like a boy again, clutching a small bouquet of white lilies. "Mom," he said softly, his voice unsteady. I didn't know where else to go. I looked at him for a long moment, at the son who had once erased me, now standing before me stripped of everything but truth. Then I smiled. "You're home, Ethan. Sit down." We talked for hours. No accusations, no tears, just honesty. He told me about the aftermath, how Tiffany left, how the mansion felt hollow, how he'd finally read every letter his father had ever written. "I wanted to make things right," he said quietly. "Not to earn forgiveness, but to deserve a second chance." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "Then start by living with kindness." "That's all I ever wanted for you." He nodded, eyes glistening. For the first time in a long while, his smile reached his eyes. As the night fell, we watched the sea together, silent, peaceful. The waves shimmered under the moonlight, endless and forgiving, and in that moment, I realized something. Family isn't just blood, it's truth, grace, and the courage to start again. My husband's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "When love is betrayed, let your silence speak louder than anger." I smiled at the horizon, because I had done just that. And finally, I was free.